The laughter cut through the quiet morning like broken glass, sharp and unforgiving, echoing across the dusty roadside lot where rusted dreams went to die. It wasn't just laughter, it was ridicule, loud enough to turn heads, cruel enough to linger. And standing there, gripping the cracked steering wheel of a battered $100 car, Haroon Malik felt every ounce of it sink deep into his bones. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that no one's story is ever truly over, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Echoes of Stories. You never know whose life you might help change just by spreading a little hope. The sun was already high, casting a harsh white glow over the uneven ground. The car Haroon had just bought looked like it had been abandoned by time itself. Its paint was faded into an uneven gray, patches of rust eating through the edges like scars. One headlight was cracked, the hood slightly dented, and the interior smelled faintly of dust and forgotten years. It wasn't much. In fact, it was almost nothing. But to Haroon, it was everything. He wasn't just buying a car. He was buying a chance. Behind him stood his 7-year-old daughter, Ariba, her small fingers clutching the hem of his worn shirt. She didn't understand the laughter, not fully, but she felt it. Children always do. Her wide eyes moved between her father and the woman who had just mocked him, silently asking a question she didn't know how to form. The woman, Samina Qureshi, adjusted her sunglasses and smirked as she leaned against her gleaming SUV parked just a few feet away. Her car shone under the sunlight, its polished surface reflecting everything the old wreck could never be. Her laughter had drawn a small crowd, onlookers who watched with mild curiosity, some amused, others uncomfortable. Haroon kept his head down, pretending to inspect the car keys in his hand. His fingers trembled slightly, but his grip was steady. He had learned long ago that dignity didn't come from what people said about you. It came from how you carried yourself when they did. Life had not been kind to him. 2 years earlier, he had lost his wife, Sana, to a sudden illness that left him not only grieving but drowning in medical debt. The small mechanic shop he once owned had collapsed under the weight of bills and unpaid loans. Everything he had built with his own hands was gone. What remained was a tiny rented room, a daughter who depended on him for everything, and a stubborn refusal to give up. This car, this broken, forgotten piece of metal, was his attempt to start again. He had a plan, though it sounded foolish even to himself. Haroon had once been known in his neighborhood as a skilled mechanic, someone who could bring life back to engines others had written off. He had worked on everything from motorbikes to old sedans. But there was one dream he had buried long ago, a dream of restoring something rare, something special. When he first saw this car listed for just $100, something stirred in him. Beneath the rust and neglect, he had noticed details others ignored. The shape of the body, the structure of the frame, it wasn't just any old car. It was something older, something once admired. He couldn't be certain, but his instincts whispered that it might be worth more than it seemed. Still, instinct didn't pay bills. It didn't guarantee success. It only gave him hope. Samina's laughter lingered even after she drove away, her SUV disappearing in a cloud of dust. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise. Haroon opened the car door and motioned for Ariba to sit inside. She climbed in carefully, her small face lighting up with a fragile smile. To her, it wasn't a broken car. It was their car. That was enough. The next few days blurred into a relentless cycle of work. Haroon transformed the narrow alley behind his rented room into a makeshift workshop. He borrowed tools from an old friend, scavenged spare parts from junkyards, and spent every waking hour bent over the car. The sun rose and set, and he barely noticed. Grease stained his hands, sweat soaked through his shirt, and exhaustion settled into his muscles like a permanent weight. But with every bolt tightened, every wire fixed, every layer of dust wiped away, the car began to change. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it started to reveal its true form. Ariba became his quiet companion during those long days. She would sit nearby, drawing pictures on scraps of paper or handing him tools with a seriousness far beyond her years. Sometimes she would hum softly, filling the air with a gentle warmth that made the work feel less lonely. Haroon didn't tell her about his doubts. He didn't tell her how the money he had spent on the car was nearly all they had left. He didn't tell her that if this failed, he didn't know what they would do next. Instead, he told her stories. Stories about engines that roared back to life, about broken things that became beautiful again, about people who refused to give up even when the world laughed at them. And she believed every word. By the fourth day, the transformation was undeniable. The engine, once silent, now responded with a low, steady hum. The body, though still imperfect, had regained some of its original shape. Haroon had even managed to uncover an old emblem hidden beneath layers of grime, a symbol that made his heart skip. He knew that emblem. It belonged to a limited series of classic racing cars from decades ago, models that had once dominated tracks and captured the imagination of enthusiasts. Most of them were lost, scrapped, or hidden away in private collections. If this was what he thought it was, then everything could change. But doubt lingered. What if he was wrong? What if this was just a coincidence, a false hope dressed as opportunity? On the fifth day, just as the sun reached its peak, a sleek black car pulled up near the alley. It wasn't the kind of vehicle that belonged in a place like this. It was too polished, too precise, too intentional. A man stepped out, his presence quiet but commanding. He wasn't dressed extravagantly, but there was a certain confidence in the way he moved, a calm assurance that didn't need to announce itself. His name was Xavier Ralph, though Haroon didn't recognize him immediately. Xavier walked slowly toward the restored car, his eyes scanning every detail with careful attention. He didn't speak at first. He simply observed, as if piecing together a story only he could see. When he finally looked at Haroon, there was no mockery in his expression. Only curiosity. What happened next would change everything. Xavier explained, in a measured tone, that he was a collector, and more than that, a former racing legend whose career had once made headlines around the world. He had been searching for a particular model for years, one believed to be nearly extinct. The emblem, the structure, the subtle design elements, everything pointed to the possibility that Haroon's $100 purchase was one of those rare machines. But it wasn't just the car that impressed him. It was the restoration. Xavier spoke of craftsmanship, of passion, of the kind of dedication that couldn't be faked. He pointed out the careful repairs, the attention to detail, the way Haroon had preserved the original integrity of the vehicle despite having so little to work with. Then he made an offer. $5 million. The number hung in the air, unreal and impossible. Haroon thought he had misheard. His mind struggled to process it. $5 million wasn't just money, it was a lifetime of security, a future he had never dared to imagine. For a moment, he looked at Ariba, who stood quietly beside him, her eyes wide with wonder. He thought of the nights she had gone to bed hungry, the mornings she had woken up pretending not to be. He thought of the promises he had made to her, promises he wasn't sure he could keep. And then he nodded. The news spread quickly. Stories like this always do. The same people who had watched in silence, who had laughed or looked away, now spoke of Haroon with admiration. Some called it luck. Others called it fate. But those who had truly seen what he endured knew better. It wasn't luck. It was resilience. It was the quiet, stubborn refusal to let life define his worth. As for Samina Qureshi, she returned to the roadside lot days later, only to hear the story from others. The laughter she had once thrown so easily now felt distant, hollow. For the first time, she understood that what she had mocked wasn't a man's failure, but his courage. Before we reach the end, take a moment to comment and share your thoughts. Stories like this remind us of something deeply human, something we often forget in the rush of everyday life. Months later, Haroon opened a new workshop, this time his own, built not out of desperation but purpose. It wasn't flashy, but it was honest. A place where broken things were given a second chance, just like he had been. Ariba started school, her laughter replacing the silence that once filled their days. And Haroon, though still humble, carried himself differently, not because of the money, but because of what it represented. Proof. Proof that no matter how low you fall, no matter how loudly the world laughs, your story is never finished unless you decide it is. If this story touched your heart even a little, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that hope still exists. And before you go, leave a comment saying, second chances are real, if you believe that every person deserves another shot at life. Because sometimes, all it takes is 5 days, to turn everything around.